My name is Lillian Harper. I'm 65 years old, a retired history teacher who still believes dignity is the only inheritance worth passing on. That evening, the sun draped its last light across Crosswinds Estate, the place my late husband Ben and I bought long before luxury found its name here. The air smelled of salt and roses, the kind Ben used to plant by the gate. Inside the grand ballroom, 100 candles shimmered against crystal glasses, and laughter spilled like champagne over marble floors. It was my daughter's engagement night. I had spent weeks searching for a gift that carried meaning, not money. When I finally found it, a silver bracelet engraved with Lydia's initials, I wrapped it carefully, hoping it would remind her of simpler days when love wasn't measured in carats or columns. As I approached their table, the conversations hushed. Lydia looked radiant in a gold gown, her smile practiced yet trembling at the corners. Beside her sat Damien Cross, the man she planned to marry. A polished face, sharp eyes, every gesture calculated for an audience. Investors filled the room, whispering about deals and prospects. They weren't here for vows, they were here for show. Still, I held the small velvet box close, believing a mother's heart could be louder than applause. When I opened it, the bracelet caught the light. "It's lovely, Mom," Lydia said softly, her voice uncertain. Damien leaned forward, fingers resting on his wineglass, the glint of a Cartier logo flashing at his cuff. "Silver?" he asked, smiling at the guests. "That's quaint. We're used to platinum around here." A polite ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, quick and thin. Lydia's smile faltered. I felt every eye on me, measuring the weight of my offering, not the warmth behind it. I closed the box gently and smiled. "It's the thought that endures," I said. "Silver never rusts." My voice was steady, though I could hear the hush of embarrassment ripple across the table like wind over water. Damien lifted his glass. "We'll handle the bill tonight," he announced, his tone playful but pointed, like a thread drawn too tight. My chair felt suddenly small, the chandelier light too harsh. I caught Lydia's eyes. She wanted to fix it, but her hand froze halfway across the table. I let it be. Some lessons aren't taught in the moment. They unfold in silence. Across the hall, the band shifted to a slower tune. Waiters swept by carrying crystal trays, and I felt my breath even out. Humiliation can shrink a room, but it can also sharpen what truly matters. As Damien turned to greet a passing guest, I glanced toward the tall windows that overlooked the gardens. Beyond them lay the path Ben and I once walked, mapping dreams that later took shape in deeds and signatures. My fingers brushed the edge of my wedding ring, now dulled by years, but still unbroken. A camera flash snapped me back. One of the guests, a young journalist, leaned to another and whispered, "She's the quiet one. They say the groom's family owns the estate." I smiled faintly. Assumptions, I thought, are like mirrors in fog. They show what people wish to see, not what's there. I sipped my water, calm returning like tide after storm. If you've ever been overlooked in a room you built, or silenced at a table you once set, stay with me. This story isn't about wealth, it's about worth. And sometimes, the gate to justice opens not with noise, but with proof. The evening pressed on. Toasts were raised, glasses chimed, and laughter returned in waves. I nodded when spoken to, folded my napkin neatly, and waited for the last song to fade. Lydia came to hug me goodbye, her perfume mingling with the scent of gardenias. "Mom, don't take it personally," she whispered. "He just gets nervous around old traditions." I kissed her cheek. So do storms before they pass. Outside, the night had turned cool. The estate lights shimmered against the cliffs of Malibu, and I walked slowly toward my car. My heels clicked along the stone path Ben once chose himself. I could almost hear his voice, calm and certain, reminding me that grace is not weakness, it's will under quiet control. Behind me, music swelled once more, a celebration echoing in a house whose name they'd borrowed for a night. I unlocked the door, set the gift box on the passenger seat, and took one last look at the mansion, standing tall against the horizon. I whispered to the dark, let them call it theirs, for now. Because somewhere in a filing cabinet, tucked between legal stamps and signatures, the truth waited, patient, precise, undeniable. As I started the engine, the radio hummed softly, a melody Ben used to play on Sunday mornings. The bracelet's silver glimmer caught the dashboard light, steady and strong, just like the woman who wore its meaning. Some battles don't need witnesses, they need records, and some gates open only when you hold the right keys. I drove down the winding path, past the iron gates that had welcomed me 1,000 times before. The guard nodded politely, unaware of the irony that would later circle back to this very spot. I smiled to myself, the night air filling with salt and resolve. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll revisit what's mine, not to boast, but to remember. Every ending begins quietly, with a truth waiting to be seen. Mine began here, beneath chandeliers and laughter, with a silver bracelet and a lesson in grace. The road home curved along the Pacific, a ribbon of quiet light under the fading moon. I rolled down the window, letting the salt air wash away the sting still clinging to my chest. Malibu faded in the rearview mirror, and with each mile, the laughter from the estate softened into a memory I no longer wanted to hold. The sea stretched beside me, endless and calm, as if reminding me that storms, no matter how sharp, always meet their edge. By the time I reached Pasadena, the city had fallen asleep. Street lamps cast long shadows over jacaranda trees, their blossoms scattered like lilac snow. My house waited at the end of the lane, modest and warm, still carrying the scent of the cinnamon candles Ben used to light when we'd stay up late grading papers. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, eyes fixed on the porch light flickering gently through the branches. The silence felt heavier tonight, but not empty, just honest. Inside, I slipped off my shoes and walked across the wooden floor, the boards sighing softly under my feet. On the wall hung a photograph of Ben in his navy suit, smile calm, eyes steady. He had been gone for 7 years, but some evenings I still caught myself waiting to hear his pen tap against the kitchen table, or the creak of his chair as he turned to share a thought. He was a real estate lawyer, thoughtful and thorough, the kind of man who believed a signature was a promise. "Never rush the fine print, Lillian," he'd tell me. "That's where truth hides." I stood before the photo now, whispering, "You'd have handled tonight better than I did." His eyes seemed to meet mine, patient as ever. I traced the edge of the frame with my fingertip, then turned toward the study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Folders lined the shelves, labeled in Ben's careful handwriting, deeds, titles, trusts. On the desk sat a stack of unopened mail, and beside it, a leather-bound ledger he'd used for our estate planning years ago. Curiosity stirred, soft but persistent. I hadn't looked at those documents in ages. Back then, Crosswinds had been our retreat, a place for family summers and long walks by the cliffs. After Ben's passing, I'd left it under management, letting others handle the upkeep while I focused on the classroom. It had never occurred to me that something so deeply ours could one day be mistaken or claimed by someone else. I opened the cabinet drawer and pulled out a stack of old folders, dust rising like breath in lamplight. The pages whispered of years gone by, bank statements, maintenance receipts, tax forms stamped and signed. At the bottom, a brown envelope caught my eye, creased but intact, marked in Ben's handwriting. Crosswinds, title copy. My heart steadied. I set it aside, choosing not to open it yet. Some truths need the right hour to be seen. Instead, I sat at his old desk, running a hand over the grain of the wood. There were nights when Ben would study here, glasses perched on his nose, the faint scratch of his pen filling the quiet. I used to bring him tea, lean on the doorway, and listen as he read clauses aloud, like verses of a patient hymn. He believed knowledge was armor, and that every document carried a heartbeat if you knew where to listen. Tonight, I could almost hear it again. The rhythm of ink, the cadence of reason. The bracelet still lay in my purse, cool against my hand when I reached for it. I thought of Lydia, her uncertain smile, the flicker of apology behind her eyes. She was caught between worlds, I knew. Between love that demanded display and love that asked for depth. I wanted to reach her without wounding her pride, to teach her what Ben had taught me, that true value doesn't shimmer, it stands. A clock ticked softly above the doorway, marking the late hour. I rose and crossed the threshold into the hallway, the same one Ben had crossed 1,000 times. For a moment, I paused there, between past and present, and breathed in the familiar hush. This house had seen every version of me: teacher, wife, widow, mother, and now, perhaps, witness. My reflection glimmered faintly in the glass of a framed certificate. Master of Arts, Legal Studies. I'd earned it years ago, more for curiosity than career. But as I met my own eyes in the glass, I realized knowledge never truly expires. It waits, quiet as ink, until called upon. I reached for the light switch, but something in me lingered. The envelope on the desk seemed to hum with purpose. Tomorrow, I promised. I'd call Harriet in the morning, ask her to review it with me. She'd know what to make of old papers and new pretenders. For now, I needed rest, not revenge. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Outside, the wind moved through the garden, rustling the ivy along the fence. The house felt steady, grounded, a contrast to the glittering halls of Crosswinds, where charm masked control. I thought again of the guard at the gate, the way he'd greeted Damien with rehearsed familiarity. Would he have recognized me? Would any of them? I smiled faintly. Recognition isn't given. It's earned, and sometimes reclaimed. As I turned out the light, I glanced once more toward Ben's photo. You always said the truth leaves a paper trail, I murmured. Maybe it's time I follow it. His smile, frozen but kind, seemed to agree. I walked down the hallway, the bracelet cool around my wrist, the promise of dawn waiting behind drawn curtains. Tomorrow would bring questions, and I was ready to start looking for answers. Morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns across the kitchen table. I sat with a cup of tea growing cold, the steam long faded. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock above the stove. I had slept little, my mind wandering through memories and unfinished thoughts. The brown envelope from last night still rested on the counter, its edges worn but firm, like something waiting to speak. I promised myself I would call Harriet soon, but first, I needed to hear from Lydia. I hoped she'd call to check in, to bridge the silence left after that uneasy toast. The phone buzzed beside me. I reached for it quickly, the way mothers do when they see their child's name appear on the screen. But it wasn't Lydia. It was Damien. His name glared back at me, bold and unexpected. I hesitated before answering, my thumb pausing above the green icon. Finally, I pressed it and held the phone to my ear. Mrs. Harper. His voice began smoothly, too smooth. I wanted to call personally and apologize for last night. The bracelet, well, it caught us off guard. Lydia treasures your thoughtfulness, of course. The words slid across the line, polished but hollow. I understand, I said softly. Not everyone values the same things. Silver is quieter than gold. Sometimes people overlook it. He chuckled politely, but there was no warmth. Right. It's just different circles, you know? Things work a certain way in our world. Presentation matters. Investors were present, and the tone of the evening needed to reflect a certain image. I glanced toward Ben's photo on the wall. An image can fade, I said. Character doesn't. A small pause followed, then a faint sigh. I appreciate your insight, Mrs. Harper. Really, I do. And I mean no disrespect. I just wanted to clear the air before the wedding. It's important to Lydia that everything runs smoothly. We want the day to be perfect. His voice tightened slightly on the word, we, and I could sense the shift coming before he spoke it. There's one small detail we need to settle, he continued. It's about guest management at the estate. Security will be strict. The guest list is locked for privacy reasons. We've had to limit entry to registered guests only. I set the cup down slowly, the clink echoing through the room. And where do I fit in that list? Well, that's the thing, he said, clearing his throat. The staff has been instructed to follow protocol. Only approved names will be allowed through the gate. We're streamlining traffic, you understand. No exceptions. A long silence unfolded. The window light shifted across the table, landing on the silver bracelet glinting softly against my wrist. So you're telling me, I said calmly, that I might not be allowed onto the property where my daughter's wedding is being held? It's not personal, he replied quickly. It's just security. The guest list was finalized weeks ago, and we can't risk confusion at the gate. You know how events like this can spiral if too many people show up unannounced. We're aiming for elegance, order. I'm sure you understand. I breathed in slowly, steadying the rise of heat behind my ribs. Order is admirable, I said, but you might want to be certain whose order you're enforcing. He paused again, the silence stretching thinner than courtesy allowed. Look, Mrs. Harper, I'm just trying to keep things simple. We'll handle the arrangements, the costs, the guests. All you need to do is enjoy the day. I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. Thank you for the clarity, Damien. I do enjoy knowing exactly where I stand. He exhaled, relief mistaking itself for victory. Glad we could talk this through. I'll have Lydia call you later. When the call ended, I set the phone down and let the quiet return. Outside, a hummingbird hovered near the window, wings beating faster than the eye could follow. Its stillness inside that motion reminded me of something Ben once said after a difficult case. Grace isn't the absence of strength. It's what strength looks like when it's thinking. I turned toward the counter where the envelope waited. The edges of the paper glowed in the sunlight. I pulled it close, smoothing its surface with my palm. The seal gave easily beneath my fingers. Inside lay the title deed, crisp and dated, stamped with both our signatures. Crosswinds Estate, owner of record, Lillian Harper. For a moment, the room seemed to still. I traced the lettering, remembering the day we signed it. Ben's steady hand guiding mine, the quiet pride in his smile. The house, the cliffs, the gardens. They had been ours, still were. My phone buzzed again, a message this time. Lydia's name appeared. Mom, Damien said he called. Don't take it the wrong way, it's just logistics. I typed back, understood, I'll be there on time. I didn't mention the deed, not yet. Some truths speak louder when shown. I folded the document carefully, slid it into a fresh envelope, and placed it in my bag. There would be a right moment to reveal it. A moment earned, not forced, For now, I poured myself another cup of tea, the steam rising once more, gentle and clear. Across the table, Ben's photo caught the light again, his eyes steady on mine. I nodded toward him. "I'll handle it, Ben, with grace." Outside, the day grew brighter. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the estate waited, its gates closed, its guards instructed. But paper remembers what people forget. And the truth, patient as ink, was already on my side. The morning unfolded quietly, sunlight stretching across the hardwood floors as if guiding me back toward the study. I carried my second cup of tea with both hands, steady now, ready to face what waited in the brown envelope. The house felt alive in a gentle way, humming with the presence of old knowledge and the faint scent of jasmine drifting from the garden. Today, I wasn't just a mother nursing a bruised heart. I was a woman retracing the path of her own handwriting, each signature a breadcrumb of belonging. I laid the deed flat across the desk, smoothing the creases with care. The paper was yellowed slightly at the corners, stamped and notarized, the ink from 2008 still sharp enough to tell its truth. My name rested above Ben's, side by side, like two signatures holding hands. I remembered the day we signed it, how he'd smiled, calling Crosswinds a promise written into law. "Homes change," he'd said, "but paper remembers." His words, quiet yet certain, echoed through the room now, stirring something that had slept too long. Beside the deed, I placed the property ledger Ben once kept. The pages bore neat columns of expenses, property taxes, and correspondence from the estate's management office. My eyes scanned down the familiar entries until I reached a name I didn't recognize: Cross Development LLC. The date beside it was recent, within the last 2 years. I frowned, tracing the notation again. There was no record of any transfer, no sale, no consent. Just a lease arrangement logged in neat black ink, as if someone had tried to turn ownership into partnership without the owner's hand. The phone rang softly on the corner of the desk. I picked it up before the second ring. "Harriet," I said, relieved to hear her warm, measured voice greet me on the other end. "Morning, Lillian. You sound more awake than most at this hour. Everything all right?" "Better now," I said. "I've been looking through Ben's old files. I found the deed for Crosswinds. It's still in my name, always was." Harriet's pause carried the kind of weight only a lawyer's silence can hold. "That's good," she said finally. "That's very good. And you're sure it's the original copy?" "Yes. Signed, sealed, notarized. But there's something else. A line in the ledger. It lists a tenant, Cross Development LLC. Do you know that name?" "I do," she said slowly. "It's a shell company. Damien's, if I'm not mistaken. He used it to lease the estate for event hosting. Perfectly legal, assuming the owner agreed." I turned the page again. The owner didn't. Harriet sighed, the sound of both frustration and confirmation. "Then he's overstating his rights. Leasing for events is one thing, but claiming family ownership, that's misrepresentation, especially if he's using it for press coverage or investor relations." "He is," I said. "There was a journalist last night, said the groom's family owned the estate." "That's risky," she replied. "If he's portraying it as a family asset, he's misleading investors. You have grounds to challenge that, quietly and cleanly. Do you want me to pull the records?" "Yes, please. I'd like to see everything tied to this LLC." "Consider it done," she said. "I'll send you a property extract by noon. Keep the deed safe. And Lillian?" "Yes?" "Don't let him define your place. The law already has." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Harriet. I'll wait for your call." When the line went silent, I set the phone aside and leaned back, letting the weight of the truth settle in. It wasn't anger that rose within me. It was clarity. All those quiet years I'd spent thinking the estate was something behind me, when all along it had been mine, steady as a heartbeat. Crosswinds had never left my care, only my attention had wandered. I pulled a clean folder from the drawer, sliding the deed inside. On its cover, I wrote in firm pen strokes, "Owner documents." Next to it, I placed the velvet box with the silver bracelet. One was proof of love, the other of truth. Both dismissed the night before, both now shining with quiet purpose. A notification blinked on my phone, an email from Harriet. Attached was a PDF labeled Property Extract, Cross Development LLC. I opened it and scrolled through pages of filings, lease agreements, event permits, all citing tenancy under a company address, not ownership. There it was in black and white, the thin line between privilege and pretense. I printed the file, the soft whir of the machine filling the silence. As the pages slid out, I imagined Damien rehearsing his speeches, shaking hands with investors, boasting about legacy. All the while, his empire stood on borrowed ground. In the corner of the study sat Ben's leather briefcase, untouched for years. I opened it, half expecting the scent of old tobacco and ink to drift out. Inside were envelopes, fountain pens, and a stack of handwritten notes. One slipped free, unfolding itself onto the desk. His voice came back to me through the ink. Dignity isn't defended in noise. It's proven in documents. I read it twice, then slipped the note into my purse beside the deed. The sun had risen fully now, casting gold across the framed certificates and family photos. Lydia's face smiled up from a picture taken long ago when her laughter still came without hesitation. I touched the edge of the frame gently. "I'll see you soon, sweetheart," I whispered, "and I'll come through the gate with grace, not permission." Down the hall, the clock struck 9. The tea had cooled, but I didn't mind. Some things gain strength when left to rest. I gathered the folder, the note, and my resolve. The day ahead was calling, steady and certain, and I was ready to answer. By noon, the sky over Pasadena was clear and still, the kind of light that sharpens every edge. I sat at the dining table with a folder open before me, the papers neatly stacked, corners aligned. Across the top page, Harriet had highlighted key details from her research. Cross Development LLC, established 3 years ago, managed solely by Damien Cross. The lease agreement bore his signature, but the space marked for owner authorization was blank. My pen hovered above it for a long moment before I set it down. Silence can disguise truth for a while, but documents do not forget. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. "Harriet Bloom," came her familiar voice when I answered. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "The LLC pays rent through an automated transfer. Every payment references your ownership records. He knew exactly who the estate belonged to, Lillian. He's operating under lease, not lineage." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "So the claims he's making in public, about the estate being part of his family, those aren't just impolite, are they? They're misleading," Harriet said firmly, "especially if he's courting investors under that assumption. If he's telling the press he owns it, he's crossing more than one line." I looked down at a printed article lying beside the folder, its headline bold and self-assured. "From startup to society, the Cross legacy expands to historic Malibu estate." A photo of Damien and Lydia smiled up at me, both of them framed by the Crosswinds balcony. He stood tall, hand resting over hers, while she leaned toward him, trusting. I ran my finger over the caption. The couple celebrates their engagement at their family property, a $25 million landmark overlooking the sea. The word family seemed to glint like glass, sharp and fragile. Harriet's voice softened. You don't have to confront him yet. Gather your proof, stay patient. When the truth surfaces, it should be undeniable. I understand, I said. Thank you, Harriet. You've done more than you know. When we hung up, I folded the article neatly and slipped it into the folder. Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of garden soil after watering. I thought of Lydia, her bright eyes clouded by love's uncertainty. She'd always believed the best in people, even when they showed her their second-best selves. The phone chimed again. A message this time. Lydia. Mom, I'm sorry about last night. Damien didn't mean to upset you. He just worries about appearances. The investors expect everything to look perfect. I stared at her words, my heart pulling between ache and understanding. Appearances. Such a costly word. I typed back, I know he's under pressure. So are you. Take care of your heart, not his headlines. Her reply came quickly. You always say things I have to think about for days. Good, I wrote. Thinking is what keeps love honest. I set the phone aside and walked toward the study window. The light spilled across the desk, illuminating the photograph of Ben. He'd spent his career teaching people how to read between the lines, to look for what was missing as much as what was written. Misrepresentation is never an accident, he'd told his students. It's a story someone wishes were true. I watched a pair of sparrows flit across the fence, their shadows dancing across the lawn. In the quiet, the truth felt close, just beyond reach, but moving nearer with each discovery. I turned back to the desk and opened my laptop. If Damien wanted to build an image, he'd leave traces of it everywhere. A quick search of his company website confirmed it. On the homepage, a banner stretched across the screen. Cross-development, rebuilding heritage, one legacy at a time. Beneath it, a gallery of glossy photographs, fundraising events, sleek interiors, a shot of the Crosswinds Gate with the caption, Our Family Home. My breath steadied. I captured each page, saving them as evidence. Truth, after all, is most powerful when preserved exactly as it's spoken. When the last image was stored, I sat back and closed my eyes for a moment. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the breeze, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, all the small sounds of ordinary life surrounded me, grounding me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger shouts, clarity whispers, and clarity was what I needed. I pulled a notepad toward me and began to write in even lines. Deed, 2008. Harper ownership. LLC lease. Valid, not transfer. Public claim. False representation. Evidence. Articles. Screenshots. Payment logs. Witness. Harriet. Each point was a step. Each step a quiet return to rightful ground. I tore the page carefully and placed it on top of the folder. The afternoon light deepened, turning the walls a soft honey hue. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and carried the cup to the porch. The street outside was calm, the air filled with birdsong. I took a slow sip and thought of Lydia's childhood laughter echoing through crosswinds, of Ben reading under the old oak tree, of summers spent chasing the tide. The estate was more than a property. It was a story written in footsteps and promises. No article could rewrite that. As the tea warmed my hands, I made a quiet vow. I wouldn't confront Damien in anger. I would meet him in truth. And when the time came, he would face not my voice, but my proof. Inside, the folder waited on the table, a collection of quiet certainties. I smiled to myself, calm and sure. Some battles are not fought in courtrooms or conversations. Some are won by patience, one document at a time. The next morning arrived with a pale gold hush, the kind of calm that hides quiet revelations. I brewed coffee and opened the window, letting in the sound of doves settling on the fence. The table was still covered in papers. printouts, notes, and the deed that had become my silent ally. As I sorted through them, my phone buzzed with a message from Lydia. "Mom, can you check the seating plan I just sent? Damien wants to make sure everyone feels included." I smiled faintly, grateful for the small gesture of consideration. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, setting my mug aside. The attachment opened into a sleek spreadsheet, rows of names, color-coded by table. I scrolled slowly, eyes tracing each line, noting familiar friends, distant relatives, colleagues of Damien's whose titles stretched longer than their names. For a moment, I almost missed it. Then my gaze landed on the letter H, where my name should have appeared between Harper and Harrison. The space was blank. My breath caught, soft and sharp, like a page torn too neatly from a book. I scrolled again, certain I'd overlooked it. Lillian Harper, L. Harper, even Mom. Nothing. The rouse continued without me, orderly, efficient, and entirely indifferent. A quiet chill spread through my chest, not from surprise, but recognition. Some absences speak louder than presence. The doorbell rang, a gentle chime breaking the stillness. I gathered my composure and opened it to find Harriet standing there, a leather folder tucked under her arm, sunglasses perched in her hair. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, "and I thought you might appreciate a second pair of eyes." Her timing, as always, was impeccable. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She set her bag on the table and looked over the papers, her brow furrowing slightly at the spreadsheet on my laptop. "That's the seating chart?" "Yes, Lydia sent it to me this morning." "And you're not on it," she said, more statement than question. "No," I answered, folding my hands to steady them. "Apparently I've become a guest too invisible to list." Harriet leaned closer, adjusting her glasses. "May I?" I nodded, and she snapped a quick screenshot, saving it to a folder on the desktop. "Proof," she said calmly. "Small things matter. People forget that deletion leaves a trace." Her tone was practical, but her eyes softened as she turned back to me. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," I said. "The truth has a way of stitching its own seams." She smiled faintly. "That's Ben's influence talking." "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe it's just age. You stop needing to shout once you know what's already yours." Harriet closed the laptop gently and poured herself a cup of coffee. "You've got everything you need now. Ownership proof, public misrepresentation, and this. It's a pattern, not an accident." I looked down at the folder, the edges of the deed visible beneath the top page. "He's not just trying to shape perception," I said quietly. "He's trying to erase origin." She nodded. "Control is easier when history goes missing. But you're documenting every omission, and that's what matters. It's not about how loud the lie is. It's about how clear the record stands." We sat together in the warm hush of mid-morning, sipping coffee, the weight of shared understanding filling the space more comfortably than words. Outside, a mail truck rolled past, tires crunching softly against the curb. The ordinary rhythm of the neighborhood, gardens watered, dogs barking, distant laughter, felt almost surreal against the quiet current of revelation inside. "I'll keep the screenshot safe," Harriet said. "Email it to me too, just in case. Sometimes people edit lists after they realize what's missing." I nodded and sent it immediately. The moment it landed in her inbox, I felt something settle, like a small stone finding its rightful place. Harriet stood to leave, smoothing her jacket. "Miles should be back from the estate tomorrow. He'll know the security protocol. If Damien thinks a list can bar you, he's forgotten that property law writes its own invitations." "Good," I said, because I plan to walk through that gate quietly, not ask to be let in." She smiled. Quiet entrances often echo longest. After she left, the house felt calm again. I walked to the study and opened the drawer where I'd kept Ben's letter, the one written years ago in his neat, deliberate script. I read the first line aloud, more to myself than the room. "Dignity is a ledger, Lillian. Balance it daily." I closed the note, the edges soft from handling. Maybe this was my accounting, the quiet reckoning of what's owed and what's real. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, glinting off the silver bracelet resting on the shelf. I picked it up, running my thumb over its engraving. A small circle of truth in a world busy with pretense. Lydia had loved it once. Perhaps she still did, beneath the noise. I hoped she'd see one day what value truly looked like. A gift not bought, but built. I returned to the laptop and glanced once more at the empty space where my name should have been. It didn't ache this time. It simply clarified. To be removed is not to be gone. The estate was mine, the deed was proof, and soon the gate would open. Not from kindness, but from fact. As dusk began to gather, I closed the folder, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the quiet, "Every omission tells a story, and mine's almost ready to be heard." The following day brought a cool wind off the ocean, carrying the faint scent of sage and salt into the valley. I'd just finished watering the small rose bush Ben had planted years ago when a dark sedan pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out, adjusting his tie, his presence tidy and unhurried. I recognized him immediately. Miles Grant, the estate manager at Crosswinds. He'd worked under Ben and me for nearly a decade, a man who believed paperwork was as sacred as prayer. "Mrs. Harper," he greeted, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was on my way to the coastal office and thought I'd drop by with an update." "You're never a disturbance, Miles," I said, setting down the watering can. "Come in. You look like you've got news." Inside, I led him to the kitchen table, where a pot of coffee already waited. Miles was the sort who noticed details. The way the deed folder sat open beside a neatly stacked pile of papers didn't escape him. He smiled faintly. "You've been busy." "I have," I replied. "I've been retracing old records. It seems Crosswinds has become quite the backdrop for someone else's success story." He exhaled softly and nodded. "Yes, I've seen the articles. The staff forwarded a few to me. I wasn't sure if you'd want them." "I've read them," I said. "They use words like family estate and heritage property. Do you know who approved the usage?" "No one from our side," Miles answered carefully. "Leases don't grant image rights, and they certainly don't rewrite ownership." He sipped his coffee, then added, "You've always been listed in the owner registry. That hasn't changed." I met his eyes. "Tell me about the registry." "It's a secure log," he explained. "Every estate under our management is flagged by tier. Crosswinds falls under priority access. Owner present. Your name, Mrs. Harper, triggers a notice at the gate. Even temporary tenants, like Mr. Cross's LLC, don't have that level of clearance. Staff can't override it. It's automatic." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. "So, if I were to arrive at the gate unannounced?" "They'd check the registry," he said. "Your name appears, they open the gate. It's that simple." The truth warmed through me, steady and affirming. "Thank you, Miles. That's good to hear." He nodded, folding his hands. "I wanted to come in person, not by email. With the wedding coming up, the estate's under a lot of attention. I've reminded the staff to follow policy strictly. No exceptions, no assumptions." "That's wise," I said. "Clarity keeps peace." Miles glanced at the bracelet resting near the papers. "It's been a while since I saw that piece. Ben gave it to you, didn't he?" On our 15th anniversary, I said. He said silver never shouts, but it lasts longer than gold. He smiled. He was right about most things. The clock in the hallway chimed softly. Outside, a gust rattled the ivy against the fence. I poured him another cup. Tell me, Miles, does Damien know about the registry? I suspect not, he said. Tenants rarely read the fine print, and if they do, they assume it applies only to security, not authority. Then we'll let him keep assuming, I said quietly. There's dignity in letting arrogance teach its own lesson. Miles gave a small, approving nod. I admire your composure, Mrs. Harper. Not everyone handles these things with grace. Anger fogs the lens, I replied. I'd rather see clearly when the moment comes. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. This arrived yesterday. A courtesy notice, pre-wedding inspection, sent automatically to the owner's address. It's scheduled for 2 days before the ceremony. I'll be there, but the policy requires owner presence. I accepted it, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. Then I'll see you there. He stood, slipping his hat back on. If you need anything, additional documentation, staff testimony, just let me know. Everyone at Crosswinds respects you. We remember who built the place. His words settled gently, like truth landing exactly where it belonged. Thank you, Miles, I said, for keeping the roots steady. That's my job, he replied. And my honor. I walked him to the door, watching as he stepped into the car and drove down the lane. When the sound of the engine faded, the quiet returned, full of promise. I turned the envelope over in my hands, pre-wedding inspection, and smiled softly. Paper had a way of finding its rightful reader. In the study, I filed the envelope alongside the deed and the screenshot. Each piece formed part of a larger portrait, one that would soon be impossible to misinterpret. I closed the drawer and rested my hand atop it, thinking of Ben's steady voice. The law doesn't raise its tone, it just waits to be read. Through the window, clouds began to gather over the distant hills, their shapes folding like pages ready to turn. Somewhere beyond them, Crosswinds stood, its gates firm, its registry intact, its truth unshaken. And when the day came, those gates would recognize me, not because I demanded it, but because paper and principle would stand quietly beside me. I extinguished the kitchen light, the envelope still warm in my hand. For the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. Not the fragile kind, but the kind built on knowledge. Solid, documented, undeniable. The day after Miles's visit, I woke to a soft knock at the door. When I opened it, Lydia stood there, framed by morning light, holding a bouquet of white lilies. Her nervous gift, the kind children bring when they're not sure what to say. Her smile was tentative. I was driving by, she began, and thought I'd stop in. Come in, sweetheart, I said, stepping aside. The house seemed to relax at her presence, though her shoulders carried a weight she tried hard to hide. She placed the flowers in a vase while I poured coffee, the silence between us full of things unsaid. Big week ahead, I offered gently. She nodded, stirring her cup, though she hadn't added sugar. Everything's moving so fast. The planners keep calling, investors want photos, and Damien... She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. He just wants it perfect. I sat across from her. Perfect is a word that can break a person if they're not careful. Her fingers tightened around the cup. He doesn't mean harm, Mom. He's just under a lot of pressure. The articles, the coverage, they're supposed to help the company. I studied her face, the hesitation behind her practiced calm. Do they help you? She hesitated. I don't know anymore. I reached for her hand. You know, your father used to say that love and pressure don't mix, One grows, the other crushes. Her eyes softened, the memory drawing a fragile smile. I miss him. So do I whispered, especially when silence feels heavy. She looked away, staring out the window where sunlight traced lines across the garden. Damien wants to move up the rehearsal schedule. He said he'll handle the guest arrangements himself. That's generous of him, I said quietly, though generosity usually invites, not excludes. She frowned. What do you mean? Nothing more than it, says, I answered. I just hope every seat is filled with care. Her brow furrowed. Did something happen? I smiled faintly. You know me, Lydia. I've learned not to expect too much fanfare. Quiet places suit me. She sighed, her shoulders drooping slightly. I know he can be particular. He likes order. He says people trust you more when you look like you belong. And where do you belong, darling? I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to find the answer. The silence that followed spoke for her. I reached for the silver bracelet resting on the table. Do you remember when I gave you this? Her eyes filled. I was 10. You said it was a promise, that no matter how far I went, I'd always have something real to hold. Promises, I said, don't lose weight with years, only meaning. The phone on her lap buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It's Damien, she murmured. He's checking on rehearsal details. She answered quickly. Hi, love. Yes, I'm at Mom's. Just stopped by for a bit. A pause. No, we haven't talked about logistics. Yes, I'll tell her. Of course. I know. I'll be home soon. Her tone softened, but a flicker of unease crossed her eyes before she hung up. He says the rehearsal will be private. Just the wedding party and investors. He wants it tight, professional. No distractions. Distractions, I repeated softly. Strange word for family. He didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. He's just focused. I gave a gentle nod. Focus is good, but so is seeing what you might be blurring out. She rubbed her temples. Sometimes I think I'm being ungrateful. He's worked so hard. There's a difference between gratitude and surrender, I said. You can thank someone without disappearing. Lydia looked at me then, eyes wide with something close to recognition. I don't know when I stopped deciding things for myself. It's never too late to start again, I said. She leaned back, tears glimmering but unshed. You make it sound so simple. It isn't, I admitted, but clarity rarely arrives in noise. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, another pull. She silenced it, staring at the dark screen. He'll wonder why I haven't replied, she whispered. Let him wonder, I said gently. Silence is sometimes the only way people notice they're speaking too loudly. She smiled faintly, a small exhale escaping her chest. You always find the quiet path. Because quiet paths remember where they lead, I replied. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I should go. Thank you for the coffee and the conversation. You're welcome, I said, walking her to the door. You don't have to rush next time. She nodded, pausing on the porch. I'll see you at the rehearsal. I'll be there, I said. One way or another. She hesitated, eyes searching mine. You always have that look, Mom, like you know something's about to turn. I smiled softly. Maybe it already has. As she walked to her car, I watched her silhouette shrink along the road, the lilies still bright in the vase behind me. Some awakenings bloom slowly, like flowers reluctant to face the sun. Lydia was beginning to see the difference between love that lifts and love that binds. And when the moment came, she'd remember whose name was written on the ground beneath her feet. The morning before the rehearsal dawned soft and gray, the kind of sky that asks for reflection rather than rush. I stood in my bedroom, the air faintly scented with lavender, a garment bag unzipped across the bed. Inside hung the dress I'd chosen, navy blue, simple, with sleeves that brushed the wrist. It wasn't the color of wealth, but of calm seas, steady and deep. I ran my fingers over the fabric, smoothing it gently, thinking of how often women armor themselves not in steel, but in grace. On the dresser, a small mirror leaned against a stack of folded scarves. I caught my reflection there, lines softened by time, eyes clear but not cold. Age had taught me how to be still in the face of storms. As I pinned my hair, a familiar voice rose quietly in my memory, the one I'd carried for 7 years now. Dignity isn't about being seen, Lillian. It's about being certain. Still teaching me, Ben, I whispered, touching the frame of his photograph. In it, he stood beside the cliffs at crosswinds, wind lifting his tie, eyes full of quiet humor. I placed the picture near the mirror, their reflections merging in the glass. From the nightstand, I drew out the brown envelope. Inside lay the deed, our signatures intertwined, and the pre-wedding inspection letter Miles had brought. I checked them both once more, not from doubt, but ritual. Proof is a form of prayer when truth has been questioned. I tucked them neatly into a larger cream envelope and sealed it. Across the front, I wrote in firm script, "Owner documents, Crosswinds Estate." Next, I reached for the velvet box that held the silver bracelet. The engraving caught the morning light, LH, tiny, steadfast letters. I placed it around my wrist, fastening it with care. It had always felt more like a circle of memory than jewelry. I remembered Lydia's small hand when she first wore it, the way her eyes shone with pride. That was before she learned to measure worth in whispers and glances. I hoped she'd remember again soon. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from Harriet. "Everything's set. I'll meet you at the inspection tomorrow. Keep the envelope close." I replied, "Always." Stepping back to the mirror, I studied the woman staring back at me. She wasn't angry. She was anchored. Behind her reflection hung the echoes of lectures delivered, papers graded, meals shared, years lived honestly. You can't fake the steadiness that comes from keeping your word. On the vanity, an old handkerchief embroidered with Ben's initials waited beside a folded note. I unfolded it, tracing the loops of his handwriting. Love isn't about being obeyed, it's about being believed. My throat tightened as I read it again, and for the first time in days, the sting of last week's laughter faded into something lighter. He had believed in me, then, now, always. I slipped the note into the envelope with the deed. Together, they formed a story that no headline could rewrite. As I placed the envelope in my handbag, a soft chime sounded from my phone. A message from Lydia. "Just a reminder, rehearsal at 5. Damien says to come early if you can." I typed slowly. "I'll be there, dear, right on time." For a moment, I lingered by the window, watching the sunlight break through a thinning veil of clouds. The garden shimmered with dew, and somewhere beyond the hills, the sea glimmered faintly, crosswinds waiting, patient as always. I walked to the mirror once more, fastening a single pearl earring, a gift from Ben on our 25th anniversary. He'd said, "Pearls carry history in layers, like us." I smiled, touching the cool surface. In the reflection, I saw not just myself, but every version of the woman I'd been. Teacher, wife, mother, widow, owner. Each had walked through storms and thresholds. Each had learned that silence isn't surrender when it holds the weight of truth. I whispered softly, "Let them call it theirs. Tomorrow, paper will speak." My gaze dropped to the bracelet, silver against skin, steady as a heartbeat. It glowed quietly, a promise kept. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the curtains. I gathered my handbag and slipped into a light coat, pausing at the door. "You'd laugh at all this fuss, Ben," I said softly, "but you'd remind me, facts outlive fashion." I turned off the lights, leaving the room bathed in morning brightness. Each step toward the hallway felt deliberate, calm, as though walking toward a truth already decided. By the front door, a small mirror caught one last glimpse of me, handbag at my side, chin lifted, eyes forward. In its glass, the faint outline of Ben's photograph reflected behind me, as if walking with me once more. "Wish me courage," I murmured. The room answered in stillness, which was somehow enough. Tomorrow, I would drive down that familiar coastal road, pass through those iron gates, and stand on the ground my husband and I had built. The laughter of last week would fade into memory, replaced by the quiet certainty of ownership. I locked the door, stepped into the crisp air, and felt something shift within. A readiness, steady and sure. Some truths don't need announcement. They simply wait for the right moment to be seen. The day of the rehearsal arrived beneath a pale blue sky brushed with light cloud. The ocean shimmered beyond the cliffs, calm but endless, like a truth waiting to be spoken. I drove down the coastal road, the tires humming softly against the asphalt, the silver bracelet cool around my wrist. The cream envelope sat on the passenger seat beside me, sealed and steady, a quiet companion for what lay ahead. When the familiar gates of Crosswinds came into view, my heart tightened. Not with fear, but with recognition. The iron scrollwork curved exactly as Ben had designed, strong yet elegant, a balance of grace and resolve. I slowed as I approached, watching the uniformed guard step from his booth. He carried a tablet in one hand, his posture precise, his expression professional. The brass nameplate on his chest read, "Ethan Rowe." He offered a polite smile as I rolled down the window. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Rehearsal guests only. May I have your name, please?" "Lillian Harper," I said, calm and clear. He tapped the screen, eyes scanning the list. Seconds passed. His brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see that name listed." The breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of sea salt and roses from the outer gardens. I folded my hands on the steering wheel. "Perhaps you should check the registry instead of the guest list." He glanced up, uncertain. "Registry?" "Yes," I said gently. "The ownership registry." Ethan hesitated, then nodded, fingers moving swiftly across the tablet. A moment later, his posture shifted. His eyes widened slightly before softening with recognition. He stepped back from the car, shoulders straightening. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "please forgive me. I didn't realize. You're the registered owner of Crosswinds Estate." I smiled faintly. "I thought you might find my name there." He nodded, returning the tablet to its stand. "It's an automatic flag. Owner access has top priority. No guest list can override it. Policy is a wonderful thing when followed," I said, my voice even. He offered a small, respectful nod. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harper." The gates began to open, their hinges moving with a soft, deliberate creak. Sunlight flashed through the widening gap, falling across the hood of my car like a path being revealed. I felt the weight in my chest ease, replaced by something steadier, a quiet vindication that didn't need applause. As I eased forward, Ethan stepped aside, one hand lifted in a courteous gesture. "If you'd like, I can radio ahead to let them know you've arrived." "That won't be necessary," I replied. "They'll notice soon enough." The tires rolled over the stone driveway, each turn familiar. The estate unfolded before me, terraces lined with lavender, fountains murmuring beside marble steps. I had walked this path countless times with Ben, tracing blueprints, choosing details, imagining family gatherings that would celebrate more than wealth. Now, returning under such strange circumstances, I felt him near, steadying my resolve. Through the windshield, I caught sight of floral arrangements being set along the grand entrance. Workers moved briskly, unaware of the quiet shift happening at their gates. Somewhere inside, music rehearsals echoed faintly through open windows. The laughter drifting from the terrace carried a note of polished confidence, the kind that cracks when truth steps forward. I parked near the side garden, the same spot where Ben used to unload tools for planting. The soil smelled rich, grounding. When I stepped out, Ethan's voice came through the intercom by the gatehouse. "Ma'am, just confirming. Would you like staff escort?" "No need," I answered, pressing the button. I built the map. As I walked toward the front steps, my shoes clicked softly against the stone. A few planners glanced my way, their polite smiles uncertain. They didn't know where to place me. Guest, mother, or something else entirely. I gave them a gentle nod and kept walking. Ownership doesn't announce itself. It moves with quiet purpose. Inside the foyer, the air was cool and fragrant with lilies. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced like faint memories. On the walls hung paintings Ben and I had chosen, landscapes of the Pacific, framed in oak. Each one was a reminder of the life we'd built with intention, detail by detail. I paused before one painting, running a finger along its edge. "We're home, Ben," I whispered. From the ballroom came the sound of a string quartet tuning their instruments. Voices overlapped, Damien's brisk tone giving instructions, Lydia's softer one trying to keep peace. I took a slow breath, letting the moment settle. This was not intrusion. It was return. Behind me, a planner hurried past, then stopped abruptly when recognition dawned. "Mrs. Harper," she said, eyes wide. We weren't told." I smiled kindly. "No one needs to tell you who owns the floor beneath your feet." She flushed, nodded quickly, and stepped aside. "Of course, ma'am. Welcome." "Thank you," I said, moving toward the double doors that led to the ballroom. My reflection followed me in the glass, silver bracelet glinting, envelope in hand, expression composed. Before I entered, I paused and whispered a quiet line of gratitude, half to myself, half to the memory walking beside me. Some gates open not because we knock, but because they remember. Inside, voices hushed as I stepped through the doorway. Lydia turned first, eyes widening with something between relief and awe. Damien straightened, confusion flickering across his face. He opened his mouth, but before a word left it, a voice from the hallway carried in clear and steady, "Ethan," announcing, "Owner on site." The room fell silent. Every gaze turned toward me. I lifted my chin slightly, holding their eyes. I didn't need to explain or defend or demand. The gate had already spoken. For a long moment, no one moved. The air in the ballroom hung heavy, golden with late afternoon light filtering through the tall arched windows. I stood at the threshold, my hand resting lightly against the polished wood, the cream envelope tucked safely under my arm. Every sound, the faint hum of the quartet, the soft rustle of silk gowns, the nervous shuffle of polished shoes, seemed to hush itself. Across the room, eyes turned, curious and uncertain, reading a presence they hadn't been told to expect. I took one steady step forward. The chandelier above glimmered faintly, scattering fragments of light over the marble floor. Lydia was the first to move. Her breath caught, shoulders softening, eyes meeting mine. I saw in them a mix of relief and guilt, the kind that comes when truth starts to wake. Behind her, Damien straightened, his practiced charm flickering at the edges. His fingers tightened around a champagne glass, a small, sharp sound escaping as it touched the table. I drew a quiet breath and whispered beneath it, so only the memory beside me could hear. "Ben, give me courage." The air seemed to settle. I felt the weight of his presence, steady, unseen, like the quiet heartbeat of the estate itself. Then I began to walk. Each step echoed softly, not hurried, not hesitant. The floor beneath my heels belonged to me. The walls had once heard our laughter. The rafters held the echo of his voice, explaining contracts late into the night. Every inch of this place remembered what others had forgotten. Whispers fluttered through the crowd. "Who is she?" one guest murmured. "The groom's mother?" another asked. "No," someone else whispered back. "I think she owns the place." The words rippled outward like circles in still water. Cameras lifted subtly, a few phones angled discreetly, catching the image of a quiet woman walking through a hall built on truth. Outside, I glimpsed the faint red light of a journalist's camera through the window pane. The story was already finding its own witness. At the far end of the room, Ethan appeared in the doorway, cap tucked under his arm. "All clear, sir," he said respectfully, his voice steady. "Owner access confirmed." Damien's head snapped toward him. "Owner?" he repeated, the word strange in his mouth. "You must be mistaken. Mrs. Harper isn't—" Ethan met his gaze evenly. "Registry verification came directly from headquarters, sir. Crosswinds Estate, owner of record, Mrs. Lillian Harper." A hush fell so deep it seemed to echo. Lydia's lips parted as if to speak, then closed again, emotion brimming in her eyes. I inclined my head toward Ethan. "Thank you," I said gently. "You've done your job exactly as policy requires." He nodded once, crisp and sure, then stepped aside, leaving the floor to me. I turned to Lydia, offering a small smile. "Hello, sweetheart." She stepped forward hesitantly, voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't know." "I know," I said softly. "Some truths wait for the right time to return." Her fingers reached out, brushing my arm. You still—" "Yes," I said, finishing for her. "I still own it." A murmur passed through the guests, polite but startled, the kind of sound people make when the foundation beneath a story shifts. In the corner, I saw the journalist lower his camera, scribbling furiously into a notebook. Damien tried to recover his composure, summoning a laugh that fell flat. "There must be some confusion, a clerical mix-up. These things happen." I met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "Clerical mix-ups don't last 15 years. He opened his mouth, but the certainty in my voice sealed the space between us. Across the room, Harriet appeared through the side door, elegant as ever, her leather folder under one arm. She caught my eye and gave a small nod, a silent confirmation that the moment we'd prepared for was unfolding exactly as it should. I let my gaze travel across the faces before me. Investors, planners, friends of friends. Many had come expecting spectacle, a celebration wrapped in illusion. What they saw instead was a quiet correction, as natural and undeniable as sunrise. Lydia stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because lessons built on proof are stronger than warnings built on words," I said. "Now you'll see what paper remembers." She blinked back tears, then nodded slowly, a daughter recognizing a language older than pride. At the edge of the room, a server paused mid-step, unsure whether to continue pouring. Someone whispered to a friend, "She doesn't need an invitation." The hush deepened again, not of judgment this time, but respect. I turned slightly, glancing toward the tall windows. Beyond them, the sea shimmered faintly, calm and endless, reflecting light through glass like a silent benediction. "Ben," I whispered under my breath. "We're almost there." Then, with the grace of someone reclaiming her rightful ground, I lifted my chin and addressed the room with quiet warmth. "Please, don't let me interrupt. I'm only here for the rehearsal." A ripple of polite laughter followed, gentle and uncertain, but I smiled through it, unbothered. Sometimes truth enters not as thunder, but as a single clear note held long enough to still the noise around it. Harriet approached, standing quietly beside me. "You handled that beautifully," she murmured. "I didn't handle it," I replied. "I just arrived." And as the musicians began again, hesitant at first, then stronger, I felt something shift, not a confrontation, but a restoration. The estate, the guests, the daughter, all bearing witness as paper and presence aligned once more. The ballroom shimmered with candlelight, but the glow had changed. What had been warm moments ago now felt sharp, every flame illuminating questions that no one dared to ask aloud. I stood with Harriet at my side, the envelope of documents resting in my hand. Lydia hovered nearby, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dress. Across from us, Damien straightened his jacket, eyes scanning the room as though he could still gather the fraying edges of his performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, forcing a smile as investors leaned forward expectantly. "There's been a small misunderstanding at the door. My fiancé's mother has, of course, every right to be here. We all know Crosswinds is our family's home. Tonight, we celebrate that heritage." A polite murmur rippled through the guests, some nodding as though eager to accept his version of the story. He lifted his glass, ready to turn embarrassment into toast. But Ethan's voice carried in clearly from the side of the room. "Correction," he said firmly, addressing the crowd without flourish. "Owner access was verified by registry. Crosswind's estate belongs to Mrs. Lillian Harper." The words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. The investors glanced between one another, their smiles faltering. Lydia's face paled, her eyes shifting to Damien. I stepped forward calmly, my voice quiet but steady. "You've told many people this was your family estate. You've hosted events here, given interviews, even raised funds on the promise of legacy. But you've never owned this place. You only leased it." Damien's jaw tightened, his laugh brittle. "Technicalities. A lease gives me stewardship. It's the same thing." Harriet opened her folder and laid the deed gently on the table between us, the stamped pages catching the light. "Not the same thing," she said. "Ownership is not a technicality. This document has been valid since 2008. Every lease you've signed lists Mrs. Harper as owner of record." A murmur surged through the crowd, this time edged with doubt. One of the investors leaned forward. "Is that true, Damien? You told us the property had been in your family for generations." He stammered, the smoothness gone from his voice. "It has been part of our lives. My company manages it, yes, but—" "Manages," Harriet cut in, "not owns. And management doesn't make you family." Gasps fluttered across the room. The journalist in the corner scribbled furiously, his camera light blinking red again. Every word was being recorded, every truth sharpened by exposure. I placed my hand lightly on the envelope. "You misrepresented more than a house. You excluded the rightful owner from her own daughter's wedding. That isn't just oversight, it's erasure." Damien's voice rose, desperate. "This is an engagement celebration, not a courtroom. We don't need to dig into paperwork here." Harriet closed the folder slowly. "Paperwork is what defines truth when words fail. And your words have failed." Ethan stepped forward, cap in hand, his stance calm but unyielding. Policy states the owner can't be excluded. Registry overrides any list. Mrs. Harper's access is permanent. The room was silent, but for the soft crackle of candle flames. Lydia looked from Damien to me, her breath trembling. "Is it true?" she asked, voice breaking. "All those times you said this was your home. Was it just a show?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back before he touched her. Her eyes shone with realization, the edges of love bending under the weight of deception. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You used my estate to build your image, Damien. You tried to erase my place to strengthen yours. But the ground beneath us doesn't lie. It remembers whose hands built it, whose names signed it." The investors shifted in their seats, their smiles gone, their gazes sharp and calculating. One of them whispered, not quietly enough, "If he lied about this, what else is smoke?" Damien's face flushed, anger simmering under his skin. "Enough of this. We're here to celebrate love, not debate ownership." "Love doesn't erase people," I said softly, "and ownership isn't erased by arrogance." The words lingered, quiet but undeniable. Harriet closed the deed and handed it back to me. The weight of it settled into my palms, not heavy but certain. Around us, the guests began to murmur again, their voices no longer filled with admiration, but with questions, doubts, and a gathering storm of truth. I slipped the envelope back into my bag. "Please," I said to the room, "enjoy the evening. I only came to stand where I already belong." But as I turned to take my seat, the silence behind me was louder than applause. It was the sound of illusions cracking, of a performance collapsing under the weight of fact. The ballroom air shifted like a tide turning. What had begun as polite applause now ebbed into uneasy silence, broken only by the soft shuffle of chairs. Damien stood frozen, his charm splintering under the weight of eyes that had once believed every word he said. Harriet remained still beside me, arms crossed, gaze steady as a courtroom bench. Lydia lingered between us, caught in the collapsing center of a story that no longer held. A man in a gray suit, the lead investor, I remembered, rose from his seat, voice crisp. "Mr. Cross," he said, "perhaps you'd like to clarify. You presented this property as collateral for your expansion fund. You assured us ownership." Damien's throat tightened. "It's under my management, long-term lease, functionally the same. The sentiment doesn't secure capital." The man cut in. "We invest in facts." Whispers ignited, spreading like dry brush. Several investors leaned together, murmuring calculations that no longer added up. Someone pulled out a phone. Screens lit across the table as articles and interviews surfaced. Damien posing in front of crosswinds. Headlines proclaiming, "Our family legacy estate opens its gates." Harriet opened her folder again, sliding a printed page onto the table. "This press release," she said evenly, "was submitted by Mr. Cross's office. It names him as heir and owner. Mrs. Harper was omitted entirely. That is misrepresentation under civil law." Gasps flickered through the room. Cameras flashed. The journalist's pen scratched furiously. Lydia's breath came unevenly as she scanned the printout. "You said they got the details wrong," she whispered, turning to him. "You swore you corrected it." "I tried," Damien said, his voice cracking. "You have to understand, Lydia. Branding is everything. Investors want heritage, not leases. I just rounded the edges." Her eyes glistened. "You rounded me out of my own home." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "Lydia, please." Across the room, another voice rose, an investor in Navy, her tone sharp. "You falsified collateral. Do you realize the liability? If the estate isn't yours, the valuation is void." Damien's confidence faltered entirely. "It's not like that. The funds were secured through my company. On paper you don't own, Harriet interjected. And paper, Mr. Cross, is the only thing that matters when signatures meet consequence. A hush followed, brittle and cold. The sound of chairs scraping filled the space as investors began gathering their belongings, murmuring to assistants, exchanging knowing glances. One by one, they moved toward the door. A man with silver hair turned briefly to me, offering a courteous nod. Mrs. Harper, thank you for your transparency. I inclined my head, saying nothing. Truth didn't need gratitude. It simply stood. Damien's voice cracked through the shifting crowd. Wait, this is still a celebration. No one slowed. A woman near the exit whispered to a colleague. He sold us air. The doors opened, letting in the faint roar of the sea. Lydia stood motionless, watching the exodus. Her eyes met mine, trembling, unsure. Mom. I stepped closer, placing a hand over hers. It's all right. Let what's false fall away. It clears room for what's real. Damien turned toward her, desperation rising. You believe me, don't you? I did this for us. For our future. Our future, she repeated softly. Or your image. He hesitated, the silence answering for him. Harriet's voice came quietly. Mrs. Harper, I think we've reached the end of this act. Yes, I said, and every ending writes its own lesson. I opened my bag, retrieving Ben's letter, and placing it gently in front of Lydia. Your father once wrote, dignity, not diamonds. He meant that what glitters fades, but what's true endures. Her lips quivered as she unfolded the note, eyes tracing each line. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the candlelight. She looked back at Damien, voice trembling but firm. You asked me to choose between love and truth. I can't love what hides from light. He stepped forward, hand outstretched. Lydia, don't. But she removed the ring from her finger, holding it in her palm. For a long second, the room held its breath. Then she set it on the table beside the deed. This isn't an ending, Damien. It's a return to myself. The silence that followed was vast, the kind that holds both grief and grace. Damien stared at the ring, his voice small. You can't just walk away. I can, she said softly. You taught me how. She turned to me then, eyes full of sorrow, but also light. I opened my arms, and she stepped into them, her shoulders shaking as she whispered, I'm sorry, Mom, for believing the wrong story. I held her close. You saw what you were shown. Now you see what was always there. Applause rose softly from the back. Harriet, then Ethan, then a few guests who understood the language of quiet victories. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Damien sank into a chair, his reflection caught in the mirrored wall, no longer magnified, just small and still. The sound of footsteps faded as the last investor left, and the great doors closed behind them with a muted finality. The music had stopped. The candles burned low, and in the hush that followed, the truth stood alone, unshaken, radiant as dawn breaking through fog. For a long moment, no one spoke. The ballroom felt cavernous now, emptied of applause and pretense. The air hung heavy with the scent of lilies and wax, mingled with something more fragile, disbelief turning into silence. Lydia stood beside me, eyes swollen but clear, her hand still trembling from what she had set down. Across the room, Damien stared at the ring glinting faintly under the chandelier. His breath came shallow, his once perfect suit rumpled at the shoulders. He looked smaller now, not from height, but from the weight of truth pressing down. Lydia, he began softly, don't do this here. We can talk at home. She shook her head. Home? Her voice cracked. This was never your home. You used it. You used her. You used me. Damien's mouth opened, then closed. The mask of control he wore so carefully slipped, revealing the boyish panic beneath. "I made mistakes," he said, "but I had reasons. Investors, deadlines. If I didn't project confidence, I'd lose everything." "You already did," Lydia whispered. He looked at me then, eyes glassy, with something between shame and defiance. "You've taken it all, haven't you? The estate, the investors, her." I met his gaze, calm but not cold. "I didn't take anything, Damien. You built your image on sand, and now the tide's come in." He sank back against the chair, running a hand through his hair. "I just wanted a chance. A real life." "There's no real life in pretending," I said, softly. "Only exhaustion." The room felt vast around us, echoing with what had been said and what could no longer be unsaid. Harriet stepped forward quietly, closing her folder. "Mr. Cross," she said evenly, "for your own sake, I'd advise transparency with your investors. Misrepresentation doesn't end with embarrassment, it ends with consequences." Damien nodded faintly, rubbing at his temple. "I know. I'll fix it." "Start by telling the truth," she replied. "All of it." He exhaled, the sound closer to surrender than defense. For the first time all evening, his voice lost its polish. "You're right. I lied. About the house. About the company's health. I thought if people saw me here, they'd believe I belonged. I thought she'd love me more if I looked like someone worth loving." Lydia's expression softened, pain etched deep in her eyes. "You don't build love on someone else's name." He looked down, the ring catching his eye again. Slowly, he reached for it, then stopped, his hand hovering above the table. "Keep it," he whispered. "Maybe it'll mean something when I've earned the right to offer it honestly." Lydia folded her arms, tears threatening again. "Honesty doesn't need jewels, just courage." He looked up at her, then at me. "You both have that. I never did." Harriet glanced at me, her voice low. "Do you want him escorted out?" I shook my head. "No. Let him leave when he's ready. Some lessons need stillness to settle." Ethan, who had stood quietly near the doorway, gave a small nod. "I'll make sure he gets to his car, ma'am." "Thank you," I said. Damien rose slowly, shoulders sagging, the bravado gone. As he passed me, he paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "You could have humiliated me worse." "Humiliation isn't justice," I said gently. "Consequence is." He nodded, eyes damp, then turned toward the exit. Ethan followed him out, the sound of their footsteps fading down the corridor until the doors closed softly behind them. The quiet that remained was different now, lighter, though it trembled at the edges. Lydia stood motionless, watching the empty doorway. I slipped an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me, her breath hitching once before settling. "I thought love would fix him," she whispered. "Love can heal," I said, "but only what's willing to be mended." She nodded against my shoulder. "I didn't see it until now." "You saw it when you were ready," I said. "And that's enough." Across the room, Harriet began gathering papers, giving us space. "I'll send formal notice to the investors in the morning," she said quietly. "They'll respect how you handled this." I smiled faintly. Grace travels further than anger. Lydia lifted her head, eyes shimmering with tears that finally began to fall. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything." I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You don't owe me an apology, just a promise, to trust yourself next time." She nodded. "I will." A few remaining guests, planners, staff, distant acquaintances, began to clap softly, not in celebration, but in respect. The sound grew gently, like rain easing onto dry soil. It wasn't for spectacle, it was for truth. Lydia turned toward them, startled, then looked back at me. "They're applauding you." "No," I said softly. "They're applauding courage, and maybe a little mercy." Outside, I could hear the distant rumble of waves against the cliffs. The ocean had been restless earlier, but now its rhythm had steadied, as if even the sea understood the settling of things. Lydia took my hand. "Can we leave? Just for a walk?" "Of course," I said. "There's a garden waiting." We stepped through the open doors into the cool night air. Behind us, the candles flickered low, and the ballroom, once filled with noise and pride, stood in quiet grace, holding only the echo of lessons learned. The garden waited in gentle twilight, the sky brushed with pale violet, the sea murmuring below the cliffs like an old friend clearing its throat before speaking truth. Lanterns hung from olive branches, their light trembling against the breeze. Lydia and I walked the stone path in silence, our steps soft over moss that glowed faintly in the dusk. The scent of rosemary and salt carried through the air. Each breath felt like release, slow, deep, steady. We reached the bench near the fountain, the same spot where Ben and I once planned every column, every path. I sat down, patting the space beside me. Lydia sank next to me, her hands folded tight. For a while, we said nothing. Some quiets don't need filling. They do the work themselves. Finally, she whispered, "I can't stop seeing his face, Mom. The way it fell apart. The lies. How did I not see?" "You saw what love wanted you to," I said softly. "We all mistake attention for affection sometimes. One dazzles, the other endures." She leaned back, eyes glistening in the lantern glow. "I thought building a future meant joining someone else's. I forgot I had one." I reached into my handbag and withdrew the small leather envelope. "Your father left something for you," I said. "I wanted to give it to you when you were ready to understand it, not just hold it." Her brow furrowed as I placed it in her hands. The flap opened with a quiet sigh, revealing a photograph and a folded page. She lifted the photo first, Ben standing at these same cliffs, arm around a much younger Lydia, both smiling into a wind that lifted her hair and his tie alike. A sob caught in her throat. "I remember this day. He told me the sea never stays angry." "He was right," I murmured. "Neither does truth." She turned to the letter, hands trembling. The paper was worn at the creases, the ink slightly faded but still certain. She began to read aloud, voice quivering. "My dear Lydia, if life ever asks you to choose between shining and standing firm, choose firm. Glitter fades, roots don't. The world will tell you to climb. But remember, some ladders lean against hollow walls. Build your steps inward, not upward. And if ever you forget where you come from, look to your mother. Her quiet will remind you what strength sounds like." Her voice broke. Tears spilled freely now, darkening the paper in her lap. She pressed it to her chest. "He always knew," she whispered. "Even then." I placed a hand over hers. "He knew because he'd made his own mistakes, but he also knew we're not measured by them. We're measured by how we mend." She looked at me through tears. "You could have shouted tonight. You could have destroyed him." "I didn't need to," I said. "Truth doesn't scream. It simply arrives and asks everyone to listen." She reached into her pocket and drew out the silver bracelet I'd given her years ago, the one I'd worn to the engagement party, the one they'd mocked for being too modest. "I think it's yours again," she said, placing it in my palm. I shook my head, curling her fingers gently back around it. "No, love. You kept faith, even when it hurt. That's what silver is for." Her shoulders shook as she began to cry harder, not from shame, but release. I drew her close, resting her head against my shoulder. For the first time in a long time, the distance between us felt healed. The fountain murmured beside us, soft and rhythmic, as though echoing a heartbeat made whole. "You know," I said after a pause, "your father used to say gardens forgive us faster than people. You prune what's overgrown, and it blooms again." She nodded against my shoulder. "So we prune and start again." "Yes," I whispered. "Together this time." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of jasmine from the terrace. Somewhere beyond the hedges, Ethan's voice murmured to a staff member, calm and steady. In the ballroom, the last candles flickered out one by one. The night was settling the ledger. Lydia straightened, wiping her cheeks, her face luminous in the lantern light. "Mom," she said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled, brushing a stray hair from her face. Mothers hold faith, even when it hurts. Her lips trembled into a fragile smile, the kind born from truth finally landing. "Then I'll hold it too." We sat together in silence, watching the horizon darken into deep indigo. The first stars blinked awake, faint but certain. Somewhere, I imagined Ben smiling, the echo of his laughter woven into the wind. Lydia leaned her head on my shoulder once more. "I feel lighter," she murmured. "That's what happens," I said, "when you lay down what was never yours to carry." The fountain's song mingled with the hush of the waves, and for the first time that evening, peace felt like something we could touch. The estate around us breathed again. Not a symbol, not a trophy, but a home returning to its truth. I looked at my daughter and saw not the woman who had been lost, but the one who had found herself again. And in that moment, everything that had been fractured began, quietly, to bloom. 1 year later, crosswinds no longer echoed with the brittle chatter of borrowed pride. The marble floors, once polished for show, now carried softer footsteps. Women walking slowly through sunlit halls, notebooks in hand, their voices low but certain. The ballroom, once staged for spectacle, had been remade into a sanctuary of learning. Long oak tables, vases of lavender, chalkboards lined with words like balance sheets, inheritance, ownership. From the terrace, the ocean shimmered below the cliffs, calm and steady as breath. The estate had become what Ben and I once imagined in our quiet talks over tea, a place where dignity lived louder than display. The workshops we hosted drew widows, single mothers, women who'd been told they had nothing left. They came with stories of loss and left with paper and purpose. Each session began the same way, with a truth my husband taught me: ownership isn't arrogance, it's stewardship. I walked the garden path that morning, the air cool, fragrant with rosemary. The fountain still murmured, but now laughter wove through it. Gentle, real. Lydia waited near the steps, a folder tucked under her arm. She wore no diamonds, only the silver bracelet glinting softly in the sun. "Ready for the next group?" she asked. "Always," I smiled. She handed me the schedule, pages marked with tidy notes. "You've created something beautiful here, Mom. People keep asking why you chose to teach instead of sell." "Because peace spends slower than profit," I said. "And it lasts longer." Lydia laughed quietly. "Ben would have said the same." "He did," I replied, glancing toward the cliffs. "He said legacy isn't what you leave, it's what you light." She slipped her arm through mine. I'm glad I finally understand what he meant. We paused before the fountain, watching sunlight scatter across the rippling water. A few students were arriving at the front gate, young, old, uncertain, but hopeful. Ethan greeted them warmly, his uniform crisp, his voice calm. He'd stayed on after the wedding, calling the place the easiest post I've ever guarded. From the upper balcony, Harriet waved, a stack of folders in her arms. She'd come out of retirement to help draft our curriculum on estate planning and financial literacy. 10 minutes, Lillian, she called. Don't forget the ledgers. I never do, I called back. Lydia smiled. She hasn't changed. No, I said. Thank heaven for that. We walked together toward the study, where shelves once filled with decorative books now held manuals on trusts, deeds, and foundations. A framed photograph of Ben sat by the window, his eyes bright in the morning light. Beside it, the letter he wrote to Lydia rested under glass, the ink steady, the message timeless. Each visitor who entered this room read it before leaving, a reminder that glitter fades, roots don't. As we reached the door, Lydia hesitated. Do you ever think about him? Damien? She nodded. Sometimes, I admitted. Not with anger, just hope. Some people need distance to hear their own echo. She looked down at her bracelet. He taught me what love isn't. You taught me what strength is. And you taught me, I said gently, that even broken branches can bloom again. We stepped into the room. Sunlight streamed across the long table, glinting off open folders, pens, and steaming cups of tea. Women took their seats, murmuring greetings, settling notebooks. One of them looked up, her eyes nervous. I'm not sure I belong here, she said softly. I smiled, taking my place at the head of the table. If you've ever been told you don't, that's proof you do. The room warmed with quiet laughter. Outside, gulls wheeled across the pale sky, their wings catching light. I began the session as I always did, with a story. Once, I was turned away at a gate I helped build. They said I wasn't on the list, but the ground beyond the gate remembered me. A hush settled, the kind that invites truth in. I opened the ledger on the table, the paper thick, the ink dark. Some gates open only when you know you already own the ground beyond them. The women listened, eyes steady, pens poised. Lydia moved among them, offering gentle guidance, her voice calm and sure. Harriet scribbled notes by the window, muttering about clauses and clarity. Ethan's silhouette passed across the glass, steady as ever. And as I spoke, the estate breathed around us. Walls built on faith, gardens grown from forgiveness, rooms filled with purpose instead of pretense. The ocean beyond sparkled in the afternoon light, endless and patient. It no longer seemed to roar. It simply listened, as if it too understood that peace, once found, speaks softly. When the session ended, Lydia gathered the papers, smiling. You always know how to end on the right line. I laughed quietly, touching her hand. That's because I've learned the only story worth keeping is the one that tells the truth. And under that wide California sky, Crosswinds stood exactly as it should. Quiet, steadfast, alive, with roots deep, gates open, and rooms full of women learning that dignity, once claimed, never asks permission again.